Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, no matter where you are in this fine land of ours. I just want you to know how delighted I am that you've taken time out of your schedule to join us today. My name's Daryl Prell. I'm your host today, and it's going to be a fun conversation. And I know if you've watched our webinars before, you've heard me say that before, but this time I mean it. No, really, it's going to be fun because it's a really cool topic. And if you're here, hopefully I think you agree. So whether you're listening to this live or listening to this on demand, what we're going to do is and this is your first time, I guess, listening to our format. Let me explain to you how it works. It's really straightforward. We're going to walk through this. We're going to set the logistics, which is really how can you participate. I'll introduce you to the panelists. We're going to talk about tips and tricks, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A. Now, with that said, Q&A is an interesting point to talk about. You can ask a question whenever you want, okay? But your line is muted, so we actually can't hear you. So the only way you can submit a question is through the questions section in your control panel. And we have a little screen capture here, no matter if you're using a Windows machine or a Mac, or perhaps you have a smartphone or a tablet. You simply go to the questions section, type it in, and we'll get it. So whenever you're inspired, send us the question. It can also be used for feedback as well. So I can't hear you, there's audio issues, is this being recorded? How do I get a copy of the slides? These are all the questions we get on a regular basis. Then send them that way. So that's how you do it. It's really straightforward. But that said, we're going to do the questions at the end. All right. So you got to stick through the live part and then hit the Q&A. But it's not scripted. So you're going to hear myself and my panelists go back and forth, and I'm going to interrupt him and I'm going to annoy the crap out of him, and you're going to hear him stammer. And just like he will when he tries to answer your questions, exact same way. And so it's just proof that it's live. But in the same breath, it's real. All right. So we do these webinars solely for you to learn from our own experiences and then give you the chance to share your experiences back with the rest of the community through the Q&A process. As I mentioned, my name is Daryl Prell. I'm with Virtual Causeway, and I'm what you would call a protagonist. I'll let you look that up. I kind of like that title. It's a fun marketing title. But today I'm not the expert. I'm the host, and I'm your fellow marketer. So I'm representing you live in this conversation. And by that I mean I'm going to be hitting our expert with questions as he goes through his discussion. So we're all asking questions together. Glenn Schmelzle, he is the founder and the VP of Lead Generation for Marketing What's New. It's a cool company. Check it out, marketingwhatsnew.com. And I've had the opportunity to work with Glenn numerous times. So when we had a lot of people saying we would love for your next webinar to be on pay-per-click, we're struggling with that. It's part of our marketing mix. We're getting heat for it. We need more leads. I thought, hey, let's bring Glenn in, because that's exactly how I've worked with him on multiple times with multiple clients for this very reason. So that's the plan today. Normally we kind of go back and forth, but I'm going to let him lead the conversation, and then I'll just be rude and interrupt. So that's the scoop. All right, Glenn, the show is yours. You tell me when you want me to advance the slide. No, I'm going to interrupt you. In the meantime, I'll monitor for the questions coming in, and we'll hit you up at the end.
That's great, Daryl. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you again. Hello, everyone. And I really am thrilled to tell you about this topic and to try and tackle a question that I know is burning in the minds of many of you out there, which is pay-per-click marketing, or as it's also known, search engine marketing, still relevant in 2015? I'm going to answer that question, but I want you to go with me on a little bit of a journey here. We're going to take it and pull it apart so that we can really get this question answered for each and every one of you. And I think in broad strokes, it's fair to say that we all know how to use search engines. We're all regularly on Google. I don't think that's what's in question in the year 2015. We're all still using pay-per-click, some of us without even knowing it. And as people in business development and marketing, we certainly still see results from it. We even know that the social media platforms are getting into the game with their own version of paid advertising. That's not the real question. The real question is, are we getting value out of it in 2015? It's a tough question because it's kind of like asking whether you paid a high or a low fare for a seat on that last plane flight that you took. we know that if we were to turn to the person to the left or the person to the right of us when we're taking a flight, that we're going to find out that everybody paid a different amount. There's a billion different factors that go into how you fly. And if you only fly once in a while, you'll just take that at face value. If you fly a fair bit, and I'm using the metaphor of PPC for using PPC, like going on a lot of air trips, and trust me, I've flown a lot. We're a Google certified agency. We work with a lot of clients, as Daryl said. You get to see more of the patterns. You get to understand what goes into the pricing for that flight. So there are ways that you can actually find out. It isn't easy, though, and I want to explain this by making sure that everyone knows that the pay-per-click platforms set things up as a blind auction. And they do that even though they're going to give you some data about how you're doing in the auction. They don't really want you to know how others are doing in the auction, because that would make it a little harder for them to make their profits. So we're sitting here, each of us as individual marketing directors, VPs of marketing, CMOs, business development directors, and we're trying to run these campaigns, but we don't have adequate information. On our own, as a single PPC user, it's really hard to know how we compare to others. So we wanted to do something today that would help break that up a little bit. Like I said, we work with a number of clients, but we wanted to go even broader than the sample set that our clients give us and go out broadly to Canadian companies and do a survey. So we've run this poll so that we can find out and share with each one of you what you told us about how you're doing PPC. We're rising above the cubicle partitions and letting each of you see what your peers are doing. And the hope is that you'll understand a little bit more about how pay-per-click can be used and when you need to go to superiors and explain how it's really producing for you, that you have an adequate understanding of how you stack up against others. There's some quick stats on when we did the poll, the types of companies that we went to, the size, and the industries. I will say that it had a fair smattering of high-tech companies in there, both in products as well as software. So we've got kind of that covered. These are firms that are basically using digital marketing to go out and find needles in haystacks. Want to make a special mention of Legionnaires. They are a community of digital marketing professionals, and the idea that they've got is to basically treat lead generation as if it were as precise as engineering. And we want to give them a shout out because they helped co-sponsor the survey with us.
So to that point, the GAR community, they're like everybody on this call who is listening live or listening on demand, looking for insights and advice to lean on one another. So if you're a Twitter user, go on to Twitter at Legionnaires, give them a follow.
Exactly.
And participate in the conversation there. So then they sponsored this, we know that. They actually sponsored this for this webinar specifically. So, they're putting their money where their mouth is. But that's, talk to me about the survey.
Sure. So it went through and basically made sure that we were talking apples to apples. We went into the different platforms that people use. The main one, hands down, Google AdWords. And that we found that 100% of respondents that had said, yes, I'm doing pay-per-click, they were all on it. It is the 800-pound gorilla in the space. Interestingly, we did find that nearly a third of them, though, had taken a little bit of their money and put it over into Yahoo, Bing, as well as some of the other retargeting platforms that are out there, AdRoll being one of them. And so they were trying to diversify a little bit, or maybe also put their heads above the cubicle partition and peek over at another pay-per-click platform and use that as a way to compare to Google AdWords. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to ask them about two main things: what they did with PPC and how they felt about how they were using PPC. And I'll get to that in a second.
And I want to jump in there because that's the thing that we struggle with our clients. They think they want to do pay-per-click.
Right.
They think it's hot, and they should be doing it. But then you start showing them what the cost might be involved just to play, and all of a sudden they start second-guessing themselves. So then they're willing to cut you some slack, and they'll do it for a little bit. But they want notable, substantial results in 30 to 60 days. And so we do so much education up front before we ever start a program. And if we can't get them on side, we don't start the program. In other words, because I know from experience that they will be angry with me in 30 to 60 days. They'll feel have wasted their money, get nothing out of it, and I didn't stop them, even though they may be the one who initiated it. What I would jump in here is saying, because I'm looking at the slide, I'm looking at the median spend, which I know you're going to get to, and that is sending off bells in my experience based on somebody who's not gone into pay-per-click but thinks they want to go into pay-per-click. They want to dip their toe in the water, and none of those prices are dipping toe in your water prices.
That's right, and they probably are completely confused as to some of the survey respondents that I'm going to tell you about shortly that are spending even more than that. So we will explain how those people feel that way, but to do that, I'm going to ask you to expand your 30, 60 days, and we're actually going to delve right into the emotional roller coaster that happens when you are about to go into pay-per-click. And I borrowed this not from anything to do with marketing, but this is a well-known Gartner-inspired graph called the hype cycle. And it's used to describe any kind of new, disruptive, innovative product or service that we start to use.
And let me jump in there. If you've never seen this before, this has been around since the 90s, okay? But it's so true. Think of any device you want to. Like, it could be a PDA, right? Now we say smartphone today, but a PDA once upon a time was going to be the next biggest thing. It was all hype, and then it just dropped like a rock, and people couldn't actually, there were no such thing as apps in those days. How do I use this? So they fell into the trough of disillusionment. And then they eventually mature into your plateau of productivity, which a PDA became a smartphone. There was apps. So that's some of that maturity, right? Think of anything. Maybe a smartwatch, right? Lots of hype, and then it fell. Because what do I do with this? And now you're seeing it mature with more competition and more integration with the Internet of Things. So this is a classic Gartner paradigm that anybody in management who controls or approves your budget should know and understand.
And that you will need to understand, because you're going to fit in one or two camps. If you're listening to this, you're either going to have gone through some of this, or you're midway through it, and you know a fair bit about the emotions that you're feeling and are seeing them fall into this category, or you're at the beginning of it. And if you're at the beginning of it, my message to you is get ready.
Well, in fact, there's a lot. You mentioned your mix on this survey. There was a fair amount of high tech, so I'll say software products, I'm going to assume. Many of those new companies, especially when they're getting funding, they're in that peak of inflated expectations.
So they, more than anyone, should know what this is like.
And the guys and girls who have been around for years and saw the market didn't mature as fast fell rapidly into the trough of disillusionment.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yep. So yeah, as Daryl said, we have what happens. You go through this peak of saying, wow, pay-per-click marketing could be the solution to all of the problems that could help our salespeople have lots of leads that they're working on instead of having to hit the phones cold calling, which is a really low productivity scenario. But then you're going to go through the next part, the trough. And what you're going to find there is you're in a competitive game here. It is an auction setting. You're going to start to lower your expectations on what it could do for you, because you realize there's a lot to it. And at that point, there's one of three ways that you're going to go. I'm going to deal at first with the ones who, unfortunately, realize or don't realize they're in a trough, don't realize it's just a temporary realignment of their expectations, and instead they figure this is the best it's ever going to get. That thing we had with the peak where I was excited, that was just a passing fancy, and I don't have any appetite for this, and out I go. And when we did our survey, we interviewed all firms that had already gone through pay-per-click, and 8% of them went to the trash heap. They said, we are out of here. And I'm going to deal with the two others in turn here, but let's take a second and look at the trash heap and see what happened to those who gave up on it. So keeping in mind, this is the first of three segments of customers that go through pay-per-click. What we noticed when we looked at the actions of this group, what did they all have in common? Well, they all started a campaign. interestingly, they waited fairly long, way longer than 30, 60 days.
It's a lot longer than I would have expected, in all honesty.
We were surprised by that too. What we think happened is that they didn't really know what to look for. And they were maybe expecting pay-per-click to be the solution to all their problems, or they maybe expected it to work right out of the box. And they got disillusioned and quit.
Do you suppose this is a case where they turn it on, they fill out the initial, parameters, and then they sat
And
back and
walked
wait
away.
for the leads to come in?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Set it and forget it.
Yes.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
So that's what happens, and you end up on the trash heap. So
Yeah, I'll
I'm
stop
telling
there
people
for-
who are about to start,
Right.
if you have that mindset, please listen to the rest of this and consider doing differently, or else I don't want to be right about this, but odds are you roll the clock forward, you're going to be ending it up on the trash heap.
So if you're sitting here right now going, "Yeah, that would be me, I'd set it up, I'd follow the wizard, and then I would back off because I don't know how to optimize or refine or revise it. I don't have that experience and I can't afford to pay someone to do it." If that's you, stay tuned. I'm sure Glenn is going to tell us how to do this, because if he doesn't, then I'll remind him to do it, because I know that's something I hear all the time as an objection.
For sure.
Yeah.
And there are definitely ways to avoid the trash heap. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to those other two groups, the one that kind of ends up in the middle, and then the one that really takes off and gets productive. Here's what we found that was interesting. Remember I said earlier about how our survey asked people what they did and then asked them how they felt about it. Well, if we're just looking at the folks who started a campaign and they're still running it 2 years later, 3 years on and on, they're definitely staying with it. But we found an even split between those who were staying with it and happy that they stayed with it, and some that were staying with it but felt pretty neutral, pretty ambivalent about it. It's a perplexing contradiction. It's as if the 50% that are neutral about it know that there's something to PPC that they're not getting, so they're not ready to abandon it yet, but they're not really making the most of it. And I would say that the main thing that falls into their area, what they share in common, is that at that point, they don't try to educate themselves more on what is happening inside the campaign. And where that ends them up is a really nasty place, and it's already been mentioned on the Hype Cycle, and it's called the swamp. And you don't want to end up there. Let me tell you about the swamp. The people that are in the swamp, yes, they're spending money, but they're only looking at the results, maybe once a month, quarterly. That was the majority of the people that completed our survey, put themselves in that bucket. Some of them even said that they tested a little bit. They wanted to see if what they did on the landing page would make any difference. They wanted to see if they used different ads or keywords. Although they just let those tests kind of run and didn't take action on them. And another really important thing about how they measured, because we asked them, we said, what did you measure? Were you going for those, I'll call them simple vanity type of numbers that are high up and always front and center on your pay-per-click dashboard, and that is things like clicks, because every click equals one website visitor. We asked them, is that what you're measuring, or are you measuring something else? And they said, by and large, nope, we're measuring clicks. We just want to see how many people we can get to our site. And they, once those visitors arrived on their website, it was rather dubious what they did on the website. We asked, and we got a fair bit of silence back from our survey respondents on what those visitors did once they got on the website.
So this is where I'm going to jump in, because there's two things I haven't heard you talk about yet. So if you're going to get there, tell me to shut up. You're alluding to the one, which is when they get to the website, does the website understand the buyer's journey? Does it know how to speak to their visitors? Is it speaking on solutions and pains as opposed to features and functions? Is there a call to action? Am I sending them to just a generic website or generic page within that site? Or am I sending them to a dedicated landing page? Does that trigger an email, a nurture? I mean, the whole thing, the whole website experience is the first thing I'm going to ask about. The second thing I want to ask about, because you mentioned they've tested it, is have we even talked about what their call to actions were in their ads to see if those, maybe they had the right pricing and they spent the right money, but they had crappy ads that are of no value?
All right, so I'll handle those in turn.
Okay.
The first one about the website and what they are doing to give that visitor a good experience. Those things that they can do will improve any and every kind of traffic that they have on their website. Their search engine optimization visitors, their referral visitors, their visitors that are coming in from a partner, their visitors that are finding them offline and typing in their website. So we're in the year 2015 now, Daryl. That's almost table stakes to get a good website experience going. And I would say that in pay-per-click, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but the thing that we can't help but notice is that when people have skin in the game with some budget that they're spending on pay-per-click and they're getting rich data about what keywords drew that person to the website and then what they did once they saw the website, whether it mentioned those keywords or not, or whether it talked about features and benefits versus problems and pains. And when they're able to measure those things, like you can only measure in pay-per-click advertising, you can no longer measure them in SEO or with any of your organic traffic. That's all blocked. That counterintuitively is what helps them even faster make changes to their website. So you have to spend a little, but you're getting data that in return makes you find ways to save costs on your website and to make your website not only better for the pay-per-click visitors, but for all your visitors. Does that answer?
It does. And let me stop there for a second just to highlight a few key points for our audience. All right. So one, if you're listening to this because the title caught your attention, is it, pay-per-click, is it worth it? Then ask yourself this. Is your website adequately engaging, if you are able to successfully drive the traffic via pay-per-click? If it's not, I would personally contend fix that first before you start spending money on the program. Otherwise, the answer is no, it's not worth it. The second thing you said, you glanced over this, but this is huge for those who have either forgotten or just don't, they're not specialists on the digital side. Therefore, this is an important piece of information. Is it worth it? Yes, even if it's not for the leads as much as it is for the insights and what's driving traffic to my site that you cannot get any other way. Huge benefit there.
Correct.
That is very difficult to quantify and put on a business case as you present to your management. But as a marketer, you know this. You know the whole journey and experience. We're all buyers and consumers ourselves. So I'll shut up again and let you carry on. But that's a really important point.
Thanks, Daryl. So we have now got 2 of our segments dealt with. We can see what the sins are that the people who ended up with pay-per-click on the trash heap.
You want me to spell that for you, Glenn?
We can see the ones who have ended up in the bog or in the swamp, and that was where they will continue on, and sadly, they'll actually have a poor ROI. They might have been better to have actually stopped their spending entirely rather than continue spending money without asking for results, or at least better results than getting website traffic. So now, for those of you that were paying attention, there's the plateau. That's where the hype cycle finishes if everything is done properly. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to get to the plateau. And I'm going to address the question you asked about how do they know what to change within their pay-per-click campaigns. But to do that, I'm going to have to tell you about sleeping bags and glass boxes.
So just to be clear, it's not beer and diapers?
No, it's sleeping bags and glass boxes. So what makes the people who are different than our first 2 camps is that they understand a concept I'm going to explain with a metaphor here. The reason I'm going to explain it this way First, it's visual, but there are so many different targeting options within pay-per-click that it's meaningless to point out one of them today, like keywords, and go in a granular way at that. This is elevated for a management level audience, and so I want to describe the concept, and you will be able to then have people on your team or an outsourced partner, if you choose, work at it on this premise. But the discipline and the way that companies that act differently towards their pay-per-click and that do succeed with it and get value out of it is they look and they dive into these targeting options. The way that one might look at a sleeping bag, but not the way that it just appears on the face of it here. On the face of it, that's just a sleeping bag. Think about it for a second as if you were a physicist or a chemist or an engineer. And if you want to be really precise about it, there's a lot in here that isn't quite a sleeping bag. There are things that happen in pay-per-click where you're going to have a campaign on your hands and you're going to set targeting around it. But that targeting is going to bring you a lot of noise or a lot of people, and those might not be all of who you want. To give you an example, I'm going to rifle through at rap speed some of the targeting options you have. You have the structure and geography of your campaign. You've got the bid strategy for specific ad positions. You've got devices, screen sizes, operating systems, age, genders, interests, location, search and display network, time of day, day of week, keyword match type, negative keyword, standard dynamic ad text and ad extensions, and more and more and more. I just ran out of breath. There's a bunch more that I haven't covered. And we need to get really specific when we look at those things. We can't just take them on the face like we have this sleeping bag. So let's imagine that we want to travel somewhere and we got to pack this sleeping bag. We're going to try and fit it into a container. I want you to think of this container as something that we all have to argue for and something that's only going to be so big, and that's our budget. We can set this at a monthly and at a daily level for what we spend on pay-per-click. And we better not go above this. So if that sleeping bag, which looks like the size of an adult human, and this box, which may be maybe a foot high, even maybe smaller, we've got to figure out how to get that large sleeping bag into this small box. And we have to do that with our pay-per-click as well. And I'll tell you how the pay-per-click campaigns do this, and you're not going to like it. What they do is they take any and every type of traffic that your targeting criteria are going to give them, and they take the amount that fits inside of the budget. And they start that at 12:01 a.m., and they'll move through the day until the point at which it's spent. And then what happens? Well, any and all of that traffic, that inventory, the good, the bad, and the ugly segments that we chose and that we gave to the ad platform fit inside that daily budget. And when that money runs out on that budget, they simply stop. Now, you're going to look at this and say, well, fat lot of good that does me to have that part of a sleeping bag inside of a box, or fat lot of good it does me to have those segments of my target audience coming to my website on a certain day before my money ran out, but that's not who I really wanted on my website. That's not really who will appreciate the features that I have and will go along with me on this buyer's journey. I'm sorry, but the pay-per-click platforms don't care about who you want to get to their website. They've spent your money, and it's a done deal for them. And you can choose to stay in this trough of disillusionment and let them do this day after day after day, or you can do what we saw, the firms who said they are satisfied and very satisfied with their pay-per-click campaigns. And what they do is they get proactive. They take this through a workout. They don't just settle for what the pay-per-click platforms are doing. So what that entails is not giving them so much latitude. It involves looking at the sleeping bag as if it's really two things. Yeah, there's some fabric to it, but there's a lot of air. And that air is trapped up inside that sleeping bag, just like there are bad audiences that are trapped in and intermingled with the good audiences that you really want to have on your website. And you're going to pay for both of them if you're not careful. And I've put a little gauge in the bottom left-hand corner because this was a key thing that we saw the successful companies doing. They picked a metric, and it's not always going to be the same, but let's say by and large that it's conversions. So Daryl, you'd mentioned already, but those conversions, some of the main ones that we see are they're filling out a form on your website, they're giving an email address to sign up or to download a certain offer, they are deciding to engage with you on social media, they are perhaps even phoning a phone number to get information. There's a variety of different conversion activities. And when you start to measure those conversions, first off, you're going to see at the beginning that your pay-per-click isn't delivering a whole lot of them. But there are a few in there. And you have to start asking yourself, what is different about the people who did convert when they got to my website? First of all, when they made it through my campaign and then got to my website, what is different about that particular segment? And then you start to slice and you start to squeeze and you start to remove the things that don't. And then you test and you iterate and you change the things that you see that are working and you get rid of the things that aren't working and you optimize it. And when you're doing that and you're going through those many targeting criteria that I measured and relentlessly taking them through that process, you're going to get to the stage where I call it rolling up the sleeping bag. And you're going to start to see improvements. And you're going to have to regularly go into the campaign, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. When you're going in regularly, you're spotting these trends, you're seeing that you're besting the performance that you did before, and you're eventually removing enough air out of them that you get something that is compact enough that you have only the kind of traffic that you wanted and none of the traffic that you don't. And you have something that actually is made for efficient marketing, or in the case of a sleeping bag, made for efficient traveling. And then, of course, when you comes time to try and fit that within your budget, it all works, and you are now the master of your domain. You have the ability to tell the pay-per-click platforms, this is where I choose to spend my money, and it's an investment I'm making, and I am seeing a return on it. And I think that that will not only make you happy, but my guess is that'll make the people higher up in management at all ends of the spectrum, from the CFO to the CEO and everyone else, happy with the results. And if you continue that on, your sales group will also be happy and you will see revenue out of it. Do you have any questions at this point?
Well, I just want to recap. So, and I'm dying here. I have to get a drink of water. What I'm hearing you say is if I allow the system, if I accept all the defaults, etc., it's gonna be wide open. It's gonna be shotgun. And I could say I want this this industry or this demographic, but it's still a shotgun. And what you're saying is that I'm going to get initially a lot of traffic I don't want, like the air, and some traffic I do want. And I need to look at the reports, multiple times a week to understand what's working, who am I attracting, if that's who, and focus on the ones that I'm interested in. and so then start whittling away the stuff I don't want. In other words, you know what? They're all coming in business hours. So why am I turning this on at 12:01 midnight? Let's turn this on at 8 in the morning and turn it off at maybe 6 at night.
Don't run it on Saturday and
don't run it on Saturday and Sunday. All right. So boom. So I just took that 24-hour window and I brought it down to 8 hours maybe. Right. So there's an example of I whittled away 2/3 of the air. And then I'm just going to constantly maybe I don't want these keywords. These keywords either aren't converting for me, or these keywords, they are converting, but they're getting me somebody looking for women's lingerie and I'm selling tools, apples and oranges. So let's turn off those keywords that are driving traffic I don't want. And let's create more variations of the keywords and the ones I do want. And it's like, classic Columbo just watching his trail of clues to eventually, hone in on, the ultimate, whodunit in this case. I'm looking to find my ideal customer, which, as you think about it, folks, this is no different than selling today. If you're selling on the phone, you're dialing for dollars, you're doing email campaigns, one phone call is not going to get you a lead. You know that not every email is going to get you a lead. And you know that some phone calls, some sales reps, some emails convert better than others. So you tend to say, well, why did that email work? Or why is Johnny or why is Susie having such a great success rate on the phones? And then you try to mirror the style or the technique across all your medium, and you see your conversion rates go up and up. And that's really what, your glass box and your sleeping bag analogy, that's what I'm really hearing you say.
That's right. And you'll get it all done. You may need to. I'll say that, the budget that you start off setting, remember I talked about the group that were happy with it? They, in some cases, increased their budgets. But that was only after they saw a predictable stream of conversions coming through their pay-per-click campaign. And they realized that maybe they'd originally set their budget too small. Your point about how you've got to kind of wander your way towards finding that ideal customer is bang on. You're not going to get it right the first time. None of us do. Be okay with that. Experiment and then iterate. And once you do that, you're going to find that you don't know exactly what the end point is, but you sure know how you're doing better than you did in the last 3 days or a week before or a month before.
One thing that's important to mention, you've not mentioned it, it's implied, so I'll be a little more explicit about it, is in that learning process where you're saying, I don't want, the non-business hours. I don't want people looking for women's lingerie when I'm selling tools, right? Every time those traffic, those conversions, those clicks came in, it cost me money, even though I didn't want them. So that means I have to be prepared to spend money to learn the refinements I need to make to get to that point. Maybe it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months in before I finally have got that, perfect model of, okay, I've really got this thing fine-tuned in now. And now is what you're saying. Now that I've got this fine-tuned in, now I can consider increasing my spend.
And while this sounds like a risky endeavor, let me remind you of a field, let's say, like medicine. And is it really, Daryl, any different that when you first go and you complain to your doctor about a pain and they say, here, take this medicine. And they say, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And then you go back in 2 weeks, doctor, I don't feel any better. They make a frown, make some notes, and then they scribble something and they give you another medicine and you're trying that one instead.
Yep.
They've done the exact same thing. Or if you take someone who's an expert athlete in sports, they started off probably, let's pick basketball, standing at the free throw line, throwing the ball up, missing the basket, and again and again. Wait a second, they got every 20th one in. And then they progress, they maybe work on their technique a bit, then they're getting every 10th one, then every 5th one, and they're getting better and better. This is the same in every
Right.
field of life. And I think we need to be grown up enough about how we do marketing to make it clear to our peers as well as our superiors that we need to do this as well. And in the digital domain, we have so much data that can inform us of how we're doing these things that, yes, we're spending money on it, but it's a fraction of the money that we would have spent in days in the past with a large print media spend or a large trade show spend or a large partner affiliation, joint venture spend. So we need to look at it with mature and clear eyes and expect things out of it. And I'll end up with this point about how we get to the group that has done this process and they end up at the plateau. And there's something really counterintuitive about this group. And it comes back to what you said right near the beginning about how long they want to get results. Out of the groups that we saw in our survey, this group, out of all of them, was the least patient. They had the shortest window of time that they expected to get positive results from their campaign, which was under 3 months, under 90 days. But the interesting thing was that just like the person who got up to this vista to see this beautiful, beautiful plateau they're on, the companies that we polled did the work to get up there. They were on their campaigns once a week, twice a week, to make sure that they were improving it constantly, just like slogging up a pathway on a steep hike. And they managed to get there. They knew where they wanted to go. They were prepared to put the time in on it, and they knew what they were expecting as an outcome, which was conversions on their website. And that's what we found was the best practices that led them to find success with their pay-per-click campaign. And then when we asked them how did they feel about it, as I'll show in the next slide, they had one of the highest satisfaction rates. They used it as expected. They changed things when they weren't working, and all of them, to a person, when we said, what would you consider pay-per-click? Do you think it's an effective marketing channel or not? All of them said it was an effective marketing channel. So I think that's proof positive that in 2015, pay-per-click can still be relevant and that the people can still get value out of it. And I hope I've outlined some of the ways that the people who are successful at it have put together this series of steps that says you measure what it's doing for you, you test to see how you can make it better, and then the parts of those tests that work, you change and you implement that across the entire campaign because you've now found another better combination that's going to get you to your desired end goal.
All right. Let's see. Can they go now? Are we done?
Well, I've made the case, and for any of those that are still fence sitting out there, I think that in 2015, there's still relevance for PPC. I'd be glad to carry on the conversation and see how those who may not have already gone through this journey can see the merits of it. Because like you said, there are people who are familiar with the entire roller coaster of emotions that you go through on a campaign, and there are people who haven't embarked on that trip yet. And I would say the sooner you get started on that trip, the better.
All right. So what's the final judgment? Is pay-per-click still relevant? I'm guessing you think it is when it's done right.
I would say that, and I've got a raft of survey respondents that agree with me.
Although, as we also know, some of those survey respondents ended up in the trough of disillusionment and never got out of there.
So beware that. That's a note of caution. Absolutely. I don't want your mileage may vary. So use the responses that we got as a good explanation for how things may go. And as you work inside of your own company, particularly as you try to build a coalition of people who will agree with you and fund your digital marketing initiatives, you want to pay attention to how you may be going down the pathways, and you want to make sure that wherever you can take that turn that's going to head towards the plateau, that you take it. I will add that the survey report is going to be available, and so I want people to keep an eye out for the link on that so that we can hopefully show more what kinds of things are possible when you're able to collaborate and understand that you don't have to be alone in pay-per-click. I think it's a very solitary type of process, and the more we can do to share these best practices, the better we'll all be.
All right, so just as a sidebar, one of the things I didn't say at the beginning, but we do get asked a lot if the sessions are recorded and can they be shared and all that wonderful stuff. And the sessions are recorded. So clearly you've heard me talk about if you're watching this on demand, so there's a big clue that you're going to get a copy of this. So that's great. When we do that, we will include a link to the report results. So you can use that as part of any kind of business process assessment and analysis and how you spend your budget, or your time, your resources, tactics you decide to use for your lead generation purposes. That'll be free included just for joining us today. So that's great. We're going to do a couple things here. We're going to just hang out this slide here while we start taking our questions. And we have asked you along the way that if you have questions, you can send them in. And it's interesting, we've had a handful of questions come in where they follow it up with saying, never mind, because we already answered it along the way. So we only had a couple left. So one of the ones that was interesting is the top one. I've seen a couple people ask this question is how much, let me rephrase that, how little can they spend and still assess and refine pay-per-click as a viable tactic?
Let's go back to the sleeping bag.
Okay.
Every industry's got a different size sleeping bag. And let's call that, the inventory, the amount of people day in, day out that are searching for your kind of product or service. There's data for that, folks. And I'll point out one in particular that is the most often used in this, but there are other ones. But Google has a keyword planning tool, and it's available. You have to sign up for a Google AdWords account to get there, but the tool is free, and you don't need to run a campaign to use the tool. The tool is going to tell you for your website, and if you throw in a few terms that are normally associated with what you sell, you're going to get an estimate of how much traffic is out there. They'll also tell you how much budget they would suggest that you spend. I'll make sure that I bring this back to the sleeping bag by saying, remember that number that they're going to give you is both the good inventory as well as the bad inventory. That's the audience segments that you want and probably some you don't want, because they're scooping up all that they can. But I would suggest that you try to use the numbers that they give in a budget estimate to go for your high end of spend. And you may want to back away from that a little bit when you're putting in your request for budget on pay-per-click, but I think it needs to be at least halfway towards the top budget estimate that they're going to give in the keyword planner, because when you open up your campaign, they're going to find ways to spend in those areas, and you will need to have a large enough sample of your entire audience before you can really start to find the ones that you care about. So I don't want you to go too small or pick a number just out of the air, because you may not be able to get enough data to help you find the right pathway towards the audience that you're really looking for.
Another question comes in, and again, folks, while we're answering these questions, just go to your questions panel and submit them, and we will absolutely get them onto Glenn and see what he has to say. One of the questions they want to know is, they're in a bit of a bind. They need more leads. Are they better off to outsource this? But they're concerned. They're watching their dollars because they know if they outsource it, now they got to pay, the vendor to for the time. So will they have more success outsourcing to an expert? Part A is the question. Part B, what are the typical charges they should look to be charged by an independent third party?
Okay, great question. No right or wrong answer here. I've seen firms that, including some that were completing the survey responses, that have put the time into educating themselves, and they're running their campaigns fine. Thank you very much. Bias declared, we are, of course, an outsourced agency, so we are happy to manage campaigns as well. The way that you would normally look to budget is to try to make sure that you have both education and or outsourcing as one cost that needs to be handled somewhere. Unless you're lucky enough to have a person that you've hired into your marketing group who just knows this stuff automatically, you're going to have to spend that time and probably some courses to get that person up to speed on what they're going to do. Or you're going to go to an outsourcer who has probably been through a certification program and has already got their staff trained, because that's what they do. So I'll say that at the outset. You're going to pay for it one way or the other. To answer your question, Part B, the most typical model that is used by outsourced pay-per-click management firms is a percent of advertising spend or percent of media spend. And so you should expect to pay a certain percent, and you will see breaks on that percentage as you spend more budget. So that's something to watch for. The way that we prefer to do it is that's a good starting point. You need to start somewhere if you're just getting down this journey of using pay-per-click. When you're far enough along, though, that you understand what an individual conversion is worth to you, and that takes a fair bit of measuring, because you've got to then know what percent of those conversions turn into leads and which percent of those leads turn into sales, and you then know how much your average sale is, and you work back up the funnel to understand what you're willing to spend to acquire that new revenue. Once you do all of that math, you can then go on a performance pay basis, which is our favorite approach, and many other firms out there that do pay-per-click management. But I'll say once again, that requires understanding a lot of the numbers. And I would encourage this. Marketers now are more like engineers than they are artists. And yes, you're going to harness both parts of your skill set, but you do need to be comfortable with the numbers, because especially in an area like pay-per-click, and especially when you're dealing with outsourced firms, those numbers are going to be what it's all about. They are the main entree that you're going to be working with as you go into this.
And that's a really important point you're raising, not one to be glossed over lightly. When you're talking to your boss, you're justifying the spend, and they maybe give you grief on outsourcing it, you can respond by saying either you pay them or you pay me to learn. And paying me to learn isn't just my time, me as an employee, but it's also that other things might not get done while I'm learning this.
The opportunity cost, yes.
There's total opportunity cost there. So, factor that in. Another question here, great question. How do you minimize the effect of competitor spying?
It's pretty much a fact of life. I'm afraid that once the genie came out of the bottle and marketers started getting data about their own marketing efforts, that at the same time, it allowed competitors to find out about their marketing efforts. And I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's going to happen. And there can be some reverse engineering. But like any company would tell you that is a leader in their category, you are going to be fine if you are always focused on doing things as well as you can and serving the customer as well as you can. So if you really find that your organization is a leader in terms of what you make and how you satisfy your customers and how much you know about your customers, let that be your guide on how you do ad campaigns. We spend a lot of time talking, not with the marketing folks, but with sales, and in particular with those leads that came from pay-per-click marketing, and we want to know what kind of conversations happened, and then if they bought the product, did the actual value that they were promised a way back when they found out about it in the first place really come through for them in their customer experience with that company. And it's when we find that companies are able to keep their eye on the ball all the way down that funnel that they have marketing programs that, frankly, their competitors can't keep up with.
If they want to learn, so you mentioned the Google tools as well. Are there other third-party sites that are worthy of checking out beyond the obvious two I can think of, Google and YouTube?
Yeah, there are third-party tools. There have been ones since the early days of search engine optimization. And so for people who maybe want to wander down the hall to the person who knows some search engine tools, there are some very helpful ones that can give basic data about what kinds of keywords are bringing people to a site, what kind of competition is there around certain ones. There have been a few new entrants into the space that kick it up a little bit. WordStream is one that is fairly well known, and then there are a few others that even get into the fancier side of automating bids, because they, just like there are tools now that will allow you to set rules for when you would buy stocks, so you let's say, are a day trader, you just like to have that portfolio sitting on a screen as you work, and you will set it so that certain buys and sells are happening. There are even tools now like Acquisio and Kensho and Marin that are able to take that on. But this can get into the deep end pretty quickly, and I would encourage people to first understand what is happening, and you can still work on the native tools like Yahoo Bing, Microsoft Ad Center, and Google AdWords itself. And if you're able to go in and understand the fundamentals, that's going to be a very good guide for how you're able to understand what none of those other tools will be able to show you, which is how your own customers view you. And you need to keep your eye on that. You can get fancy with automation, and that should come in time as your company matures. But I'm going to encourage you to not jump into the automation too quickly until you've understood exactly what you're doing.
All right, we're a few minutes before the hour. We promised we wouldn't be more than an hour, and we're going to hold that promise true. So let's just recap what's going to go on here. You're going to get, in a handful of days, a link where you can play this webinar back on demand as many times as you want to. You can share it with your friends. We encourage you to post it on LinkedIn, a wonderful way to drive more interest in your own personal brand, as well as perhaps your own company Twitter feed. We're struggling with this. What about you guys? Great advice here. What are your thoughts? Go nuts in the social media. It's a great way. It's another piece of content. If you have more content, more questions, I should say, for us, Glenn or myself, you can always go to Virtual Causeway's website, vcauseway.com, and just send us a message through the contact form, and we will get back to you. No problem. If you want to follow Glenn or myself on LinkedIn, hey, we'd love to follow you back. But with that said, we've really appreciated your time today, and we've loved the interactive nature of the conversation. So if you like this webinar, there's more in the library. Go check them out. They're all available for playback on demand. And of course, there'll be another one next month. Stay tuned for that invite. We're done here today, folks. Glenn, thank you so much for your expertise. It's been a blast. I love the candor and the honesty and just, calling it as it is, one marketer to another.
I appreciate it too, Daryl. It's been fun.
Take care, folks. It's been good. Bye-bye.